The dust was a living thing. It coated Martha's tongue, filled the folds of her dress, and settled in a fine, gritty shroud over the cracked leather of her husband's old saddle. The sun was a hammer, beating down on the baked pan of the earth until the air itself shimmered with heat. Thirst was a stone in her throat. For 3 days, they had walked. Or rather, she had walked, and the old horse had limped, his head hung low, the ragged gash on his foreleg weeping a pale fluid that dried instantly into a dark crust. Pilgrim. He was all she had left of that other life, the one with laughter and rain and a man's hand in hers. Now there was only the sun, and the thirst, and the horse's labored breathing beside her. The last of the water had gone yesterday, half for her and half for him, a pitiful splash in a tin cup that did nothing but mock the emptiness of the canteen. Her own well had gone dry a month ago. The creek bed was a scar of bleached stones and brittle, dead reeds. Hope had dried up with it. She had been heading west, toward what she wasn't sure. Away, was all she knew. Away from the empty cabin and the small, mounded grave under the skeletal oak tree. But Pilgrim had stumbled, his leg sliced open on a shard of shale, and their slow progress had become a death march. Now he was pulling, a weak but stubborn insistence on the reins, turning them not west, but north. Toward the Blackjaw Mountains. A place of superstition and ill omen, a jagged spine of rock that tore at the clouds and offered nothing but shadow and stone. No one went there. Not unless they were desperate or mad. She supposed she was both. She pulled back weakly. No, boy. Nothing for us there, but Pilgrim ignored her, his one good eye fixed on the hazy purple peaks. He took another halting step, then another, his weight a heavy, trusting lean against her. The choice was his, then. She had none left. To argue was to waste what little strength remained. To follow was a fool's errand, but to stand still was to die. With a sigh that was more dust than air, she let the reins go slack and shuffled alongside him, her cracked boot sinking into the powder-fine dirt. The mountains grew no closer, a mirage of salvation that danced in the heat. The sun began its slow descent, painting the sky in cruel, beautiful shades of orange and blood. She thought of water. A deep, cool well. The shock of it on her face, the taste of it, clean and sweet. The thought was a torment. Pilgrim stumbled again, and this time, he nearly went down. She caught his bridle, her own knees buckling. "Easy, old friend," she whispered, her voice a dry rasp. Easy now. He steadied himself, his great chest heaving. And he kept walking north. The shadows of the foothills offered the first real relief, a coolness that felt like a blessing on her skin. The ground grew firmer, rising from dust to rock-strewn earth. Pilgrim's pace, though still painfully slow, became more certain. He seemed to be breathing in the scent of the stone, tasting the air for something she could not perceive. He led her away from the more obvious ravines and game trails, pushing toward a sheer wall of granite that looked impassable. A dead end. The last of her hope, a tiny, flickering ember, threatened to extinguish. She slumped against a boulder, the rough surface scratching her cheek. Pilgrim nudged her with his nose, a soft, insistent pressure. He then turned and pressed his body into a narrow fissure between two towering slabs of rock, a crack so thin it was nearly invisible in the deep shade. He grunted with effort, scraping his hide against the stone, and disappeared into the darkness. Fear coiled in her gut. To be separated from him was unthinkable. But the thought of that tight, black space, of being swallowed by the mountain, was a primal terror. "Pilgrim," she called, her voice thin and reedy. A soft whicker answered from within. He was waiting. She took a breath, the air here cooler, strangely damp. She could smell wet stone, a scent so alien in this parched world that it felt like a dream. She squeezed through the opening, her shoulders scraping, her heart pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. The darkness was absolute. She reached out a hand, her fingers finding the coarse hair of Pilgrim's flank. He was real. This was real. He took a step forward, and she followed, one hand on him, the other tracing the cold, rough wall of the passage. It was not long, perhaps 30 feet, but it felt like a journey into the Earth's core. The air grew cooler still, heavy with a moisture that clung to her face like a veil. And then she heard it. A sound she had been hallucinating for days, a whisper she had yearned for until it became a phantom torture. A soft, constant, liquid music. The sound of falling water. The passage opened abruptly. She blinked, her eyes struggling to adjust. They were in a cavern, a grotto carved into the heart of the mountain. It was not large, but it was a world unto itself. High above, a chimney-like opening in the roof let in a single, focused shaft of late afternoon sun, illuminating a scene that stole her breath. A wall of rock, slick and green with moss, wept water. Countless tiny rivulets trickled down its face, converging into a steady stream that fell into a pool so clear it seemed to be made of liquid light. Pilgrim was already there, his muzzle plunged deep into the water, drinking with long, shuddering swallows. Martha fell to her knees at the pool's edge, not caring about the damp soil that stained her dress. She cupped her hands and drank. The water was cold, impossibly cold, and tasted of stone and deep earth. It was the taste of life itself. She drank until her stomach ached, until the stone in her throat dissolved, until tears of pure, unutterable relief streamed down her face, mingling with the water she splashed on her parched skin. She leaned her forehead against the cool, damp ground and wept. She spent the first hour simply existing in the miracle of the place. She tore a strip from her petticoat and gently washed the grit and crusted blood from Pilgrim's leg. The gash was deep, but the clean water seemed to soothe it instantly. He stood quietly, his head lowered, occasionally nudging her shoulder as if in thanks. She refilled her canteen, the simple act feeling like a profound ritual. She walked the perimeter of their sanctuary. The cavern was roughly circular, the floor a mix of flat stone and a wide, promising patch of dark, rich soil directly under the opening in the ceiling. The air was fresh, circulating from the high vent, carrying the scent of moss and wet earth. It was safe. It was hidden. It was life. The single beam of sunlight acted as a celestial clock, moving slowly across the far wall as the sun set. When it finally vanished, the cavern was plunged into a soft, deep twilight, not the stark blackness of the passage. Enough light filtered down from the starry sky to see the glint of the pool and the hulking, comforting shape of her horse. She had nothing but what was in her saddlebags. A half-empty sack of oats for Pilgrim, a small bag of dried beans, a handful of cornmeal, and her husband's worn knife. And the seeds. Tucked into a small leather pouch were the seeds for the coming season, the ones they were meant to have planted together. Squash, beans, hardy greens. A promise of a future that had been stolen from her. She had carried them as a keepsake, a painful reminder of what she had lost. Now, looking at the patch of dark earth bathed in the faint starlight from above, she saw them not as a memory, but as a possibility. A different kind of future. "We could make a go of it here, old friend," she murmured, her voice soft in the echoing quiet. Pilgrim's ear twitched in her direction. "Just you and me." She ate a small handful of the dry beans, chewing them slowly, the water from the pool making them palatable. She made a bed of her saddle blanket near the pool, the sound of the waterfall a constant, soothing lullaby. For the first time in months, she did not dream of dust and death. She dreamed of green shoots pushing their way through dark soil. She woke to a world painted in the soft grey of pre-dawn. The beam of light had not yet appeared, but a gentle luminescence filled the space. The first thing she did was drink from the pool, reaffirming the reality of their salvation. The water was a daily baptism, washing away the despair of the world outside. Pilgrim seemed a different animal, his coat less dull, his eye brighter. The swelling in his leg had already begun to subside. This place was healing them both. She knew what she had to do. The world outside was dying of thirst, but in here, in the heart of the stone, was a secret wellspring. It was not enough to simply drink from it. She had to honor it. She had to plant. The work was a prayer. She had no shovel, no hoe. She used the flat side of a large rock to break the soil, and her own hands to till it, to crumble the damp clumps of earth until they were fine and soft. The soil was rich, loamy, clearly fed by centuries of dust and minerals washed down from the opening above. It felt alive under her fingers. Each day, she would work until the beam of sunlight passed beyond the garden plot, and then she would rest, her muscles aching with a satisfying weariness she hadn't felt in years. It was an ache of purpose. She laid out the rows with painstaking care, using a length of frayed rope from her saddle. She pushed each seed into the earth with her thumb, a quiet benediction for each one. Squash here, where the vines would have room to spread. Beans there, close to the damp wall. The hardy greens in the center, to catch the most direct light. It was a small garden, a tiny patch of defiance against the vast, dying landscape outside. But it was everything. She talked to Pilgrim constantly as she worked, her voice the only sound besides the water. The beans will climb, she told him, tracing a line on the rock wall. I'll need to find something for them to hold onto. Your grandfather, he loved green beans more than anything. She spoke of her husband, of their farm, of the life that had been. The memories were no longer just painful ghosts. Here, in the telling, they became foundations. She was rebuilding not just a garden, but a life, piece by piece, memory by memory. The cave held her words, the soft echoes giving them a weight and permanence. Pilgrim would stand nearby, dozing in the cool air, his tail swishing occasionally. He was her silent witness, her steadfast companion. The rhythm of their days was governed by light and water. In the mornings, she tended the soil. In the afternoons, she explored the cavern more thoroughly. She found small ledges where she could store her meager supplies, keeping them dry. She discovered that the water running down the wall was slower in some places, and she could rig her canteen to fill slowly over hours, a steady drip, drip, drip that measured the passing of time. The outside world ceased to exist. Her reality was the cool stone, the damp earth, the sound of the waterfall, and the quiet presence of her horse. The thirst, the heat, the dust, they were memories of a different life, a different woman. Here, she was not a widow, not a refugee from a drought. She was a tender of the earth. A keeper of the water. She was home. The waiting was the hardest part. After the seeds were in the ground, there was nothing to do but watch and trust. Every morning, she would approach the garden plot with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. Had she done it right? Was the light enough? Would anything grow in this strange, subterranean world? The bond between them, already forged in hardship, deepened into a silent, perfect communion. Pilgrim's leg healed cleanly, leaving only a faint, silvery scar on the dark hide. He moved without a limp now, his strength returning day by day on a diet of oats and the tender mosses he found growing at the base of the waterfall wall. He became the guardian of their sanctuary. While Martha worked in her garden, he would often stand near the narrow entrance passage, his body a solid, living curtain against the outside world. His ears were in constant motion, swiveling to catch the faintest sounds carried on the dry wind, the cry of a hawk, the skittering of a lizard on the rocks, the distant sigh of the wind across the plains. He was her sentinel, her early warning. His instincts were far sharper than hers, a primal sense that understood the language of the wilderness. She learned to read his stillness, the subtle tensing of a muscle in his flank, the low rumble in his chest that was not quite a whinny. These were his words, and she listened intently. In the evenings, after the sunbeam had left her garden to the encroaching twilight, she would sit with her back against his warm side, her hand resting on his powerful neck. The silence between them was not empty, it was filled with a shared history and an unspoken understanding. You knew, didn't you, she whispered to him one night, the starlight from above dusting the cavern in pale silver. You knew this place was here. He shifted his weight, a soft sigh escaping his nostrils, a puff of warm air against her cheek. It was answer enough. She found she was noticing the world again, not as a threat, but as a wonder. The way the light from the roof vent struck a patch of quartz in the far wall, making it glitter with 1,000 tiny stars. The subtle change in the waterfall's song after a rare, brief shower passed over the mountains, the sound becoming fuller, deeper for a few hours. The intricate patterns of the moss, a miniature forest of green velvet. This small, hidden world was more vibrant and alive than the whole sprawling, sun-scorched country she had left behind. Her grief for her husband, a constant, heavy shroud, began to feel different here. It was still present, a quiet ache in her heart, but it was no longer all-consuming. The cavern felt ancient, a place that had witnessed countless cycles of life and loss. Her own sorrow felt small in comparison, a single note in a vast, eternal song. She felt a sense of belonging that was deeper than ownership. She was not the master of this place, she was its guest, its caretaker. She and Pilgrim were part of its quiet life, like the moss and the water and the stone. This was not the life she had planned, but it was a life nonetheless. A quiet, hidden, fiercely protected life. It was enough. The first sign of trouble came not from a sound, but from a change in Pilgrim. He had been standing his usual watch at the entrance fissure when a sudden rigidity seized his frame. His head went up, his ears locked forward, and a low, guttural snort vibrated through his chest. Martha, who was weeding her thriving rows of greens, froze. She had learned to trust the horse's instincts without question. Wiping the soil from her hands, she moved silently to his side, peering through the narrow crack into the blinding sunlight of the world outside. At first, she saw nothing but the familiar expanse of shimmering, heat-distorted plain. Then her eyes caught it. A plume of dust, far to the south, rising against the pale, bleached sky. It was too thick for a whirlwind, too deliberate. Riders. Her heart hammered against her ribs. They were miles away, a meaningless smudge on the horizon, yet their presence felt like a physical violation. A trespass against the sanctity of her hidden world. Who were they? Desperate men from a dying town? Prospectors chasing rumors? It didn't matter. Any discovery would mean the end of this. Her fear was a cold, sharp thing, but it was quickly followed by a harder, fiercer emotion, protectiveness. This place had saved them. It was theirs. She would not let it be taken. She watched until the dust cloud faded, the riders moving on, oblivious. But the peace of the cavern had been broken. The threat of the outside world, a world of desperate, thirsty men, had intruded. That evening, she could not rest. She paced the small circumference of her home, her mind racing. The entrance, while hidden, might be found by a keen eye or a stroke of luck. She had to make it safer. Under the faint light of the stars, she began to work. She gathered fallen rocks from the scree slope just outside the fissure, choosing ones that matched the color and texture of the cliff face. She rolled and dragged them, her muscles straining, piling them in a natural-looking jumble that further obscured the narrow opening. She transplanted thorny, drought-resistant shrubs, planting them among the rocks to create a screen of vegetation. It was grueling, painful work. The thorns tore at her hands and arms, but she barely noticed. She worked with a quiet, methodical fury, driven by the primal need to protect her home. Pilgrim watched her, his presence a steady, reassuring shadow in the darkness. He seemed to understand what she was doing, standing aside to let her pass with a heavy rock, nudging her gently when she paused to catch her breath. When the first hint of dawn touched the sky, the entrance was nearly invisible, even to her own eyes. It looked like nothing more than a shallow alcove, choked with rockfall and scrub. It was not perfect, but it was better. It was a defense. She retreated into the cool safety of the cave, her body aching, her hands raw, but her heart a little calmer. The world outside could not have them. She would not let it. The garden, her beautiful, impossible garden, was a testament to what was at stake. The first green shoots were a revelation. They pushed through the dark soil with a force that seemed impossible, tiny, vibrant flags of life. Martha knelt, touching a new leaf with the tip of her finger as if it were the most fragile thing in the world. Each new sprout was a victory, a promise kept. The daily rhythm of the sunbeam marching across the cavern floor became the sacred measure of her life. The plants reached for it, their leaves turning to follow its path. The squash vines, thick and hairy, began to snake across the ground. The beanstalks, finding the strings she had rigged for them, started their tenacious climb up the cavern wall. The world outside continued its slow, agonizing death. The heat was relentless. From her vantage point, the plains looked like a scorched hide, cracked and lifeless. The sky was a vast, empty bowl of brass. But inside her stone sanctuary, life was exploding. The constant humidity, the rich soil, and the daily dose of sunlight created a perfect, self-contained ecosystem. The first blossoms appeared on the squash vines, delicate, yellow trumpets that opened in the morning and closed in the afternoon. She watched, fascinated, as tiny insects, residents of the cave she hadn't even known were there, moved from flower to flower, doing their ancient work. Soon, the blossoms withered and fell away, leaving behind the small, hard globes of infant squash. Her harvest was not a single event, but a slow, continuous process. She picked the first handful of green beans with a reverence that bordered on worship. She steamed them over a small, smokeless fire made from the driest moss and twigs she could find, the heat contained within a small circle of rocks. The taste, crisp, green, full of water and sun, was overwhelming. It was the taste of her own survival, of a pact she had made with the stone and the water. She ate slowly, savoring every bite, her gaze fixed on the waterfall that made it all possible. Pilgrim shared in the bounty. She sliced the tender squash for him, a welcome supplement to his oats. He ate them with a delicate relish, his soft lips plucking the pieces from her outstretched palm. She saved seeds from the strongest plants, drying them on a flat rock on a high ledge, ensuring the continuation of their small miracle. She was no longer living day to day. She was planning for a future, for the next season, for the one after that. She had created a cycle of life where before there had been only an ending. One evening, as she sat with Pilgrim, the sound of the waterfall filling the comfortable silence, a profound sense of peace settled over her. She was not just hiding. She was thriving. She had taken the worst that life and the land could throw at her and had, with the help of her faithful companion, carved out a small pocket of paradise. "We did it, old friend," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "We really did it." Her peace was fragile, a delicate thing easily disturbed. The threat she had seen before, the distant dust cloud, had been an abstraction. The next sign was sharp and immediate. She had ventured out of the cavern one evening, needing to see the vastness of the sky, to feel the dry wind on her face. She climbed a little higher up the mountainside to a rocky outcrop that gave her a clear view of the valley and the town of Redemption below. In the deepening twilight, the town was a scattering of faint yellow lights, fewer and dimmer than she remembered. It looked like a dying constellation. As she watched, a single light appeared far from the town, moving slowly along the dry creek bed. A lantern. Someone was out there, walking in the dark. It could only mean one thing: the town well was dry. They were searching for water, any sign of it, a damp patch of sand, a seep in the rock. The sight sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the evening air. These were her neighbors. The blacksmith who had mended her husband's plough. The mercantile owner's wife who had given her a bolt of cloth on credit. The people she had shared hymns with on Sundays. She knew their faces, their families, their struggles. Now they were wandering in the dark with a lantern, searching for the very thing she had in abundance. She retreated to the safety of her cave, her heart a heavy, troubled knot in her chest. For weeks, she had thought only of her and Pilgrim's survival. Her world had shrunk to the size of the cavern, her concerns to the health of her plants and the safety of her horse. Now, the needs of that other world, the one she had fled, were pressing in. She was safe. They were not. She had water. They had dust. She had food. They had hunger. The conflict tore at her. This sanctuary was her salvation, a secret gifted to her by the loyalty of her horse. To share it would be to risk it. A trickle of people could become a flood. A hidden spring could be drunk dry by a desperate town. They might strip her garden bare, foul the pool, destroy the delicate balance she had so carefully nurtured. Her fear was a living thing, whispering of loss, of being cast out again into the wasteland. But then she remembered Mrs. Gable, the baker's wife, pressing a warm loaf of bread into her hands after her husband's funeral. She remembered Mr. Henderson helping to raise their barn roof, his face ruddy with sweat and fellowship. They had been a community once. Did that bond dissolve with the water in the well? She looked at Pilgrim, dozing by the pool. He had led her here, had saved her life without hesitation. His loyalty was simple, absolute. Could she be any less? Could she hoard this gift of life while the people she had once called neighbors withered and died? The question was a weight she could not shrug off. The sound of the waterfall, usually a comfort, now sounded like an accusation. Abundance. 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 It echoed in the stone chamber, and in her soul. She made her choice before the sun's first light touched the world outside. She would not lead them here. Not to the cavern. The risk was too great. The sanctuary was too fragile. But she could not do nothing. She could take the mountain's gift to them. A silent offering. A secret act of grace. She harvested carefully, taking only what was ready, leaving the young plants to grow. She filled 2 large water skins from the pool, the cool, clear water gurgling as it filled the leather pouches. She packed her saddlebags, distributing the weight evenly. Green beans wrapped in large, damp leaves. Small, tender squash. A handful of fresh greens. It wasn't much, not for a whole town, but it was more than they had. It was hope. She waited until the moon was high and the world outside was washed in its pale, ghostly light. She led Pilgrim out of the cavern, carefully replacing the rocks and brush she had piled at the entrance. The old horse moved with a quiet certainty in the darkness, his hooves making almost no sound on the rocky ground. The journey down the mountain was treacherous, but they knew the way. The air grew hotter and thicker as they descended, the memory of the cave's coolness already feeling like a distant dream. Redemption was a ghost town. No lights burned in the windows. No dogs barked. The silence was absolute, the silence of exhaustion and despair. She led Pilgrim through the deserted streets, her heart aching at the sight of the shuttered homes. She stopped at the town well. The bucket lay on its side, the rope frayed and useless. The stone curb was littered with dry leaves. It was the dead heart of a dead town. Working quickly, her movements furtive as a thief's, she unloaded the saddlebags. She left 1 full water skin hanging from the well's winch handle. She placed the other beside it, along with the carefully wrapped vegetables, arranging them on a clean piece of canvas from her pack. It was an anonymous offering, a mystery for the town to solve. She laid a hand on the dry, weathered stone of the well, a silent prayer for the people sleeping behind their dark windows. Then, before her resolve could waver, she mounted Pilgrim and rode back toward the safety of the mountains, melting into the shadows from which she had come. She did it again 3 nights later. And again the week after that. She became a rumor whispered over shared cups of precious water. A ghost. An angel. They called her the Mountain Angel. They never saw her. They only saw the life she left behind. Each journey was a risk, but with each offering, the knot of conflict inside her loosened. She was no longer just a survivor. She was a provider. A guardian, not just of a hidden spring, but of a flickering flame of hope in the heart of a dying town. The change came subtly at first. A darker shade of grey in the morning clouds, a humidity in the air that was not born of her cavern. One afternoon, the sunbeam that streamed through the opening above was suddenly extinguished, plunging the grotto into a deep, premature twilight. Pilgrim grew restless, pacing near the entrance, his nostrils flared, tasting the shift in the wind. Martha went to the fissure and looked out. The sky to the west was a bruised, turbulent purple. The air was heavy, still, holding its breath. Then she felt it. A single drop of water on her cheek. Then another. And another. Rain. It started softly, a tentative patter on the dry rock, and then it swelled into a steady, soaking downpour. The sound was deafening, a roar that drowned out the song of her own small waterfall. She stood just inside the entrance, heedless of the spray, her face turned up to the sky. She let the rain wash over her, plastering her hair to her head, running in rivulets down her dusty dress. It was a baptism for the whole world. The drought was breaking. The long trial was ending. For weeks, the rain came and went, a gentle, persistent healing. The cracked earth drank it in, the creeks began to whisper, then to sing. From her mountain perch, she watched the transformation. The relentless, uniform brown of the plain softened, day by day, into a pale, hopeful green. The world was coming back to life. Her nighttime journeys to the town ceased. They were no longer necessary. The town well would be replenished. The people would plant their own gardens. Her secret was safe. Her duty was done. A new kind of quiet settled over the cavern. It was not the tense, watchful quiet of survival, but the deep, resonant peace of resolution. She and Pilgrim returned to their simple rhythm, governed now not by fear, but by a quiet sense of purpose. She tended her garden, which flourished in the renewed humidity. She saved her seeds. She maintained her home. She was no longer a widow fleeing from a grave, but a woman rooted in a place of her own making. She was the keeper of the spring, the guardian of the grotto. She had been led here by a wounded animal, broken and lost, and in healing him, in tending the earth, in offering succor to others, she had found her own healing. One clear evening, she stood with her hand resting on Pilgrim's strong neck, looking out through the fissure. The rain-washed air was so clear she could see every star, a brilliant, glittering canopy from horizon to horizon. Down below, the lights of redemption burned brightly, a whole constellation of them, strong and confident. They had survived. She had survived. The waterfall behind her sang its constant, eternal song. It was the sound of her life, a life of quiet grace, earned in the heart of the stone. She was at peace.